Cool. So, and I'll say this again, because now it's being recorded, but bit.ly/Rus, R-U-S, -garb, G-A-R-B, is the link to a Google Slides presentation with the majority of my handout, so to speak, which is made up primarily of images of archaeological finds from the Novgorod Museum Reserve. And in the notes of each of these slides, I have the description of the object and the centuries that they are expected to appear from. And in the first slide in the notes section, I have a link to the collection in chronological order of all of the digitized items in the Novgorod Museum Reserve, which I find to be kind of useful because there is no English version of their website. So I've got a number of different articles, including beads, temple rings, accessories, coins, shoes, and then actual examples of chains, which are relevant for an SCA context, but the majority of which were probably not being used around the neck the way we wear them. After that, I have some reference images of different ways I wear my veils. If there's time later, I hope to actually demonstrate different ways that I wrap my veils, because I know it can be difficult to tell from an image. And then to close it out, I've got some archaeological sketches pulled from different research articles, which I've linked to. Most of them are translated by Master Ivan Rozansky here in the SCA. And they are drawings of archaeological finds as well as interpretations of what would have been worn by people in different social classes. And you can find more information at the links. And then the last couple of slides are resources. I've got links, and then I've got books that I use, some of which are a little expensive, but I believe they're worth it personally. So I'd like to start off this lecture portion by thanking you all for being here. And I'd like to give you a bit of a historical background into the time period I'm talking about, because clothing is not built in a vacuum. Every single decision that every single person who makes every step of the clothing process happen is made within the context of the political, economical, and climate reality that they are living in. And so unfortunately, this is only a 2-hour class, and I only have so much time to go over this. So I'm going to do a very big bird's eye view of the general origin of medieval Russia and some of the external and internal influences that you might be able to identify in the clothing that I'll talk about. And I'm pulling a lot of this information from the primary chronicle, which is important to note, because although the primary chronicle tells the entire story of the origin of the Rus people, it was written beginning in the 12th century by a monk named Nestor, living in the monastery of the caves in Kiev, at the behest of the Grand Prince at the time, who was attempting to unify different bits of Russia a little bit. And so there's very clear religious and political influences and reasons for why he wrote what he wrote. And so it's important to note that while you are listening and while you're reading any stories from this chronicle, because there is no single truth. This is a founding legend, essentially, of the Rus people, but there's no real definitive answers to any of the questions that are raised by it. So it's generally accepted that there's a lot of truth to it, but a lot of the embellishment can be traced, and you can kind of see it. But I'm not going to go into that because that's outside of the scope of this class. I'm just going to give you an overview. So prior to what became known as Kievan Rus, there are a variety of Slavic tribes. And these tribes are loosely united ethnically, but are oftentimes at odds with one another. And so the what is generally known as the tribe that founded Kiev, the Polyanians, are recorded in the primary chronicle as reaching out to the Rus. Now, at this period in time, Rus does not refer to Slavs. It doesn't mean Russia. Rus means a certain degree of, a certain group of Scandinavians. So they reach out to these Scandinavians and they say, we need someone to rule over us. We want you to send us someone. And they send a man named Rurik and his entourage. And thus begins the Rurikid dynasty, which lasts throughout the period we're going to talk about and really ends with the Tsars. So it's a very long-lasting dynasty. And so the Rurikid dynasty really becomes the foundation of the loose collection of city-states known as Kievan Rus that later is known as medieval Russia, a land that encapsulates Russia west of the Urals and modern-day Ukraine and Belarus. So something I want to talk about, again, very briefly, is the actual structure of the Rurikid dynasty, because I find it very interesting. And I think it's something that I like to keep in the back of my head. And the reason for that is that we in the West tend to have a very top-down picture of inheritance. You have a king, and the king's oldest son becomes king when that king dies. And if he goes through all of his sons and they all die without any heirs, then it passes to the king's eldest brother, and so on and so forth. Well, I referred to Kievan Rus as a loose collection of city-states. And what I mean by that is you have a number of different cities around which are, it is land that is nominally controlled by that city. And then they are all ruled by princes who are from the same family, which is this Rurikid dynasty. And the Grand Prince is in Kiev most of the time. And so what I find most interesting is that there is a rotational system of ascension through princedom to become a Grand Prince. And that rotational system, rather than being vertical, is actually horizontal. So you have the Grand Prince, and he sits in Kiev. And then there is kind of a loose list of cities in order of descending importance. And don't ask me for this list. I don't have it. I think it changes a lot. But just for the sake of argument, I'm going to say Kiev, Novgorod, and then I'm going to throw a couple of other cities in there, like Pskov and Vladimir Suzdal. Moscow does not, it doesn't exist in the beginning of this period. It is founded, but it's really a backwater, very tiny city until the Mongols. So although Moscow is probably our most familiar city from, a modern perspective, it's not a player right now. So you've got the Grand Prince in Kiev, and the person sitting in Novgorod might be his oldest brother. And then the Grand Prince's son, if he has no other brothers, might be in Pskov. And then say his brother has a son, and that son is in Vladimir Suzdal. So say the prince sitting in Novgorod dies. Everyone below him in the pecking order rotates up one city until every city has a prince again. And when that happens, they physically move themselves and their households to the next city. But what happens to the son of the dead prince, right? He doesn't move to Pskov from Vladimir Suzdal. He's actually cut off because his father never became Grand Prince. So he is unable to become Grand Prince. And so this creates a growing class of people who have generational wealth and institutional, titles to their name, but they are cut off from power. And this class of people becomes the boyars, which is very interesting to me, I think. But this is, this is a very clean picture of the state of things, but this isn't actually what happens quite a bit of the time. And I'll get into that a bit later when I talk about Novgorod, but I want to really emphasize the intention behind this sort of rotational system. Hold on. Yes, so everyone moves up one city, and what that does is you are never, if you are a prince, you are never expecting to be in any particular city for longer than a few years. You are hoping to be moved somewhere in the future so that you can be a little bit closer to becoming Grand Prince. So you're not becoming, ideally, super attached to your city. You're not likely to wage random, unnecessary wars if you're just going to be leaving. There's no point to it. You also have a vested interest in keeping the peace with your neighbors because they're all members of your family, and they could theoretically cut you off from rotating if they were unhappy with you. This is a pretty compelling reason to just kind of toe the line. And ideally, by the time you become Grand Prince, you've spent most of your life being the ruler of successively more important cities. So ideally, the Grand Prince is the person who has the most experience, who has the most knowledge, and who's spent, the majority of his life ascending this ladder and proving successful at it. He hasn't been killed yet by anybody. And he's got a lot of experience and knowledge to bring to the table. So I want to talk about Novgorod to give an example of something which I think is a little surprising. Sometimes we're surprised when we look back at history, and we kind of go in with the expectation of seeing a certain thing, and we see something completely different. And I portray a person from Novgorod most of the time. And I like this city so much because it's actually an example of something resembling democracy in medieval Russia. Novgorod was not ruled by its prince. Its prince was a military ruler only, and Novgorod made sure that its prince knew that. He wasn't actually even allowed inside the city without permission. He and his family lived on an estate outside of the city walls. Novgorod was ruled by a council of primarily wealthy merchants who made the decisions about what happened in the city. And when they didn't like a prince, that prince was kicked out. If you read through the Novgorod Chronicles, you see endless lists of princes who only last a couple of years before Novgorod says, "We don't like you," and throws the prince out and demands a new one. And a new one is sent to them, and maybe they don't like that new one either. Famously, Alexander Nevsky, who later became a saint, was Prince of Novgorod twice because they kicked him out once and then later said, "We want you back," and he came back to them. So so I wanted to highlight that the first influence essentially on the upper class of Kiev and Rus is Scandinavian. Their rulership is from Scandinavia. And they become essentially Slavic. They very quickly come to perceive themselves as Slavic. The rest of Kiev and Rus perceives them as Slavic. There comes a point at which Rus stops meaning Scandinavian and starts meaning Slavic. But this was in the 9th century. And in the 10th century is what I think of as probably the second most important event in the founding of Russia. And again, I'm going to go back to the primary chronicle, to the story called Vladimir's Choice. And if anything, you can see the religious and political influences on this story even more. But the gist of it is that Grand Prince Vladimir in the 10th century was so impressed by the Byzantine Empire and by Eastern Christianity that he converted, and he also baptized the entire city of Kiev, and by extension, at that point, Kiev and Rus as a state was then Christian. And this sort of thing takes a long time to filter out through an entire region like that. And by the end of this period, there are definitely still parts of Kiev and Rus, especially in the rural areas that are very much not really Christian. But from this point forward, Kiev and Rus is considered Christian. And it's not just religion that they import from the Byzantine Empire. They also import a ton of art. There are a lot of artisans who travel from Constantinople to Russian cities to not only practice their art and enrich Russia, but to train up workshops of Slavic artists and artisans who start making similar art of their own. The first stone buildings in Russia are basilica-style churches made by Byzantine architects. Byzantine missionaries create the first version of the Cyrillic alphabet. And so you get stuff like icon writers and mosaics, which become very important forms of religious art. And of course, if you look at depictions of the upper class and the primarily the princes and the princesses, the people who are ruling, their clothing and what they wear looks extremely similar to depictions of Byzantine nobility, because that is what is fashionable. You are emulating the Byzantines. They are wealthy, they are powerful, and everything that we do is now with an eye toward Constantinople. And you can see that very visually. If you look at the Rus Garb PowerPoint, the archaeological drawings of interpretations of what nobility would wear are very similar to those depictions of nobility in Constantinople. So that is where I close out my brief bird's eye view of historical background, and I start narrowing in. And I want to talk first about fabric and materials that are available, because there is a big misconception that I see sometimes in the recreation community that the Rus wore wool almost exclusively, that there is very little linen that is worn. And this is a misconception that is, it's very understandable, because if you look at the archaeological record, you see a lot of wool and a lot of leather and some silk. You see a lot of animal fibers. You don't really see vegetable fibers. And so people will point to this and say, clearly, there's a lot of animal fiber being worn and there's no vegetable fiber being worn. But absence of evidence does not equal evidence of absence. And there's actually quite a lot of evidence that vegetable fibers were worn. If not quite as much as wool, then almost as much as wool. I'm going to go through that really quickly. It's important to note that the conditions of preservation that we're talking about preserve animal fibers very well, whereas vegetable fibers decompose very quickly, which makes sense then why you would see very, very little linen and hemp and similar fibers in the record, and a lot of wool. But there's actually positive evidence for the proliferation of vegetable fibers. And I'm going to go through that kind of from my perspective in order of least to most compelling. So first off, you have Hanseatic League records, which is a trading organization, loosely. You have Hanseatic League records, which show that the Roos imported linen from them. However, this linen was probably sailcloth and was not used for clothing. You have preserved flax seeds in the archaeological record, and flax is the plant which is processed to become linen. You have entire city blocks that have been excavated where every single house foundation contains tools for breaking down vegetable fiber, which are useless for processing wool or other animal fibers, showing that there was a lot of home production of vegetable fiber happening. And finally, what I find to be most interesting is there's actually a lot of fabric in the record where the warp is present and it's wool, but there is no weft left behind. The weft has rotted away. And there's other fabrics where the majority of the fabric is wool, but there are holes, there are gaps where there was a design that was woven into the fabric that has rotted away because it was a different type of fiber. With the implication being, because obviously we can't know for sure, that these were blended fabrics with a wool visible warp and a linen weft, or a primarily wool body with a design woven into it in linen. So I find this very interesting. And this brings me to, when do you use each fabric in your recreation? And I have a guideline for this. I call it a guideline because I don't follow it most of the time. I'm trying to get better at this. But we do live in the Midwest in the United States, unless you're from out of kingdom, and not medieval Russia. And so there are climate concerns, there may be budget concerns. There are times when I can't follow all of the guidelines I would like to adhere to. But this is how I conceive of it as having been done in period, and I will justify it for you. Undyed linen as a skin garment worn against the skin. All of your undergarments, undyed linen. Wool dyed as an outer garment. Any overdress that you wear, any coat that you wear, anything that's going to be very visible that you want to decorate is going to be wool. And then silk for accessories, silk for trims, silk for anything that you want to highlight, silk to add flair and color to a piece, which is going to be wool. You're not going to put silk on your linen. Unless you are extremely wealthy, you're probably not going to have an entirely silk garment. Silk was imported through Byzantium and was very expensive at this time. Byzantium did not start making and manufacturing its own silk until well after silk was being made in Asia. And so primarily silk was being imported through Byzantium, but then also from Asia. And so you've got a very long path for that silk to follow. So the majority of people, while they could afford silk from time to time, could not afford a lot of it. And I've got reasons for linen, skin, wool, outer. And I'm going to list these. If you've worked for any amount of time with these fabrics, you're probably, a lot of this will probably be intuitive to you. But I do want to justify this. So linen is very difficult to dye with historical methods. We've largely solved this problem with modern aniline dyes. You can create incredibly well-dyed linen that's very consistent looking and will stand up to the wash. But if you've ever tried to dye linen with medieval and period methods, you'll know that it's extremely difficult. It's splotchy, it doesn't like it, and it washes out very quickly. It's not dye fast. So really it's a waste to try to dye your linen. Wool, on the other hand, dyes very well and easily, and you can get it to take a lot of different dyes. Linen washes more easily than wool. Wool has a tendency to felt, it has a tendency to shrink, and linen only gets softer the more you wash it. So if you're going to have a garment that you're going to have against your skin, soaking up all of your sweat, you don't want it to be wool, you want it to be linen, ideally, so you can wash it a lot. There's a lot of the properties of the fabric where it relates to weather. Linen is breathable, whereas wool tends to be insulating, depending on how you weave it, of course. Wool is fire and water resistant, while linen is neither of those things. So you want wool to be your outer garment in case it rains or in case you're a little too close to the fire. And going back to the blended fabric I talked about earlier, in most of these finds, the warp is wool and the weft is linen. Now, the warp is the part of the fabric that is visible to you, and the weft is hidden, which primarily, depending on the weave, which indicates to me that if you're using the two fibers together, you want the part of the fabric that is visible and that is going to be exposed to be wool. And you want the stuff that is hidden, that's maybe filling out the rest of the good fabric, to be linen. And again, you have designs where there is a primarily wool fabric with missing linen design woven in. And so, again, that indicates to me the primary fabric that you want on your body is going to be wool. You want that to be seen. And the little designs that are maybe in the hem or maybe, scattered throughout the fabric, you want that to be linen. So that's my argument. You can take it or leave it. Your mileage may vary. Again, I wear a lot of linen in the summer, and I take advantage of our modern aniline dyes. And I don't really bother. My desire to be perfectly period fluctuates depending on how hot it is outside, because I do portrait Roos, and there's only so much I can do at Penzik. And I'll talk more about that later if we've got time. This is a 2-hour class, but last time I went like over half an hour answering questions, so I'm not going to make any promises. And on the handout, there are some ways that you can reach out to me if your question doesn't get answered, if you want to talk more about things. And I encourage you to do so if that's something that you're thinking about. So now I'm going to finally get into clothing, half an hour in, and I'm going to talk about something that if you sew, or if you're a little hesitant about sewing, you might be. Hold on a moment. So that's just what I read in the literature. I am not a weaver. I'm not. I find it very frustrating, actually, and so a lot of the stuff that I've a lot of the literature that I've read about weaving, I just have to read and kind of take at face value. So if that's not intuitive to you, I encourage you to do your own digging about this, because it's quite possible that what I was reading, maybe I misinterpreted it, or maybe the authors were misinterpreting what they saw.
Yeah, because I would like to mention that if it was translated, the translation of warp and weft could very well have been reversed in translation.
That's also very fair.
Yeah.
I don't know if my handout includes the link to the particular article where no, it does not. So if you want to reach out to me after the fact, I will provide you where I found the articles that I read, which argue for linen usage. And again, it's been a little while. I could have messed things up in my brain, or it could be that that methods and materials have changed as the economy of fabric has changed. And so, it's a good question, and it's one that I would like to explore further. So if that's something that interests you.
Yeah, I will definitely look into that. And thank you. I didn't mean to derail your train of,
We've got. I just want to make sure that everyone's questions get answered. That's I think the priority here for me. So I will absolutely pause to answer questions. So now I want to jump into a pattern that I use, and it's really the pattern that I use. And so I'm going to share a whiteboard, and this is the point, if I was doing this in person, where I have a blackboard, and I would just take it out and I would draw on it. I'm working with a mouse right now, so there may have to be some concessions made to my ability to draw this, but this is pink for some reason, but that's all right. So I'm going to draw roughly the pattern that I use in the hopes that it will be useful to you. And this pattern, I believe, is also on Sophia LaRouse's blog, which is linked on my handout. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this. And this is not going to look correct, but this is the neck hole. All right. So I'm going to do a spotlight. Can you see this? This glowing red dot? Cool, thanks. So this is the body panel. And this I want to emphasize, this works regardless of the class you're portraying, regardless of the gender you're portraying. You just want to adjust the length of it. You want to adjust whether it has a collar, what the arm sleeve looks like. There are things that you can adjust which will really change this up for different circumstances. But this is what I use for any garment on the torso. So you have a body panel with your neck hole in whatever shape you desire. I like to do a keyhole most of the time, and the keyholes were done either in the center or to the left of the neck. And then you have your sleeve, and you can actually do this a little bit fitted. I will often take it in at the elbow, like so. And then you have your gusset, but before you join your gusset to your sleeve, and you're actually going to add your gores. And your gores are the long pieces down the side. And these gores are differently shaped than a lot of gores that you may have seen. There are no triangles. You are not going to deal with any triangles or buttonholes or eyelets in this. Your gores are rectangular down to about your waist, and then they become kind of triangular. And there are 4 of them. I want to emphasize that this is an incomplete drawing. I only drew this half of it. And then this gusset is a square, which you sew, and it becomes kind of a triangle. So once I stop sharing, I will show you more closely what it looks like once you sew it up in the armpit. But it becomes once you get the geometry down, it becomes very intuitive. So hold on, stop sharing. Okay. So this is what it looks like in action. This is my gusset, which gives me a bit of room for my armpit. These are my gores. And my gores travel down to about my waist where they become wider and they fill out the dress so that the skirt is a much wider circumference than at the waist. And then there's a lot of different collar styles, mostly standing collars. But I'll talk a little bit more about that later. This pattern is essentially what I would consider to be universal for gender and class and whatever. As for pants patterns, there's a style of pant known as Roost Pants, which a lot of people use. I want to say that Roost Pants have some questionable scholarship. Roos in Roost Pants probably refers to the Scandinavian Roos, because those are more what we would consider to be Norse or Viking pants, as opposed to pants in medieval Russia. If you're making pants in medieval Russia, I actually haven't made pants because I don't wear a lot of men's garb unless I fight, and when I fight, I wear sweatpants or scrub pants, and that is essentially what they are. Sweatpants, scrub pants, trousers. It's a simple pair of pants without all that much going on. And again, I can't really talk too much about the pattern because I've never made it, but so I don't want to mislead anyone. But I would avoid Roost Pants unless you really like them because they are very fun. They're very puffy and big, or if you're going earlier period. But within the scope of this class's time period, I would emphasize just normal pants. So now I'm going to transition into talking about men's clothes. Most of the clothing I've made is for women, so this is going to be a shorter section, and I apologize for that. A lot of the styles of the embellishment of the garment is similar, but it's also the case that women's garment had more embellishment. If you look at one of the books I recommend, which is the most expensive book I recommend, it's called The Burial Dress of the Rus in the Upper Volga region, late 10th to 13th centuries, by Yulia Stepanova. You can go through individual grave finds and read through all of these different interpretations, and what you notice is that women tend to be buried in much more stuff. It's generally accepted that if you were a woman and if you were around marrying age, you were buried in your wedding garments. And if you were a man, you were probably buried in normal clothing because it wasn't quite as much of an affair. There are some, differences in burials between boys and men, but the main difference is the presence or absence of a belt. The vast majority of burials of men, of male skeletons, that are, considered adult, have belts, whereas children don't seem to. And these belts are mostly leather. They may have metal fittings on them. The belt I'm wearing right now has some period metal fittings, so I'll show that. Women also wore belts. They were more likely to be woven, but they could be leather. And there are a lot of garments, especially fancier garments, that you don't wear belts at all. I'm getting off track. I don't want to jump around too much. I want this to be comprehensible. So I'll stick to men's garments right now. But let me find my other belt. Here it is, which also has period findings. You can find a lot of these online. There are a lot of vendors that make period belt fittings from various periods, and they will cite their sources often, so that you can actually see they are from specific grave sites. So men wore pants, again, simple pants, similar to sweatpants or scrub pants, and tunics, probably an under tunic, and then a tunic over top of that, and then coats and cloaks and other overgarments. So, oh, I'm going to have to evict my cat. Hold on. She's laying in my pile of garments. So I do have some clothes that my boyfriend wears. He also does Roos in this general period. And this is primarily what he wears. He has a linen under tunic and a tunic that goes over top of that is also linen, because again, we do what we can. And these tunics were sometimes embellished in other fabrics, oftentimes either fancier fabrics or fabrics that displayed some sort of wealth. And these embellishments came in many forms. What I'm wearing right now is a bar style of embellishment, often called bar coats. This is like a bar dress because it's not a coat. But these bars were often made of silk, if you could afford it, and they extend down the chest a certain length. If it is decorating a keyhole neckline, which it usually is, there may be toggles. Again, as I said, there is no buttonhole. You don't have to go into your fabric and create a hole and sew around it to secure it. If there are buttons, they may be in the form of glass beads, as are shown on the PowerPoint slides that I sent. They may be in the form of little toggles that you can sew on, which are often metal or wood. And then you have loops, which could be fabric loops. I usually finger loop braid my loops, and there are tutorials online that you can find for doing that. This is another style of embellishment. This is a tunic that I own, where there's just a square that goes over top in the front and back, and it creates a contrasting panel, which is visually distinct. There are also some embellishments on the sleeves. There's a story that I've heard a few times, but I consider it apocryphal because I haven't found any significant sources for it, which is that the superstition of the time was that ghosts or spirits would get into your clothing, into the fabric, if you didn't secure the hems and the edges with embroidery or with trim, usually in the color red. Red is very significant in Russia. The word red and the word beautiful have the same root, and they were originally the same word. So that's my take on that, is that it's probably a later period peasant belief that was extrapolated backwards. I haven't seen any reliable scholarship for it. I want to relate it because there is quite a lot of embroidery and trim on hems and on the edges of garments where they're exposed. But I think it's more of an aesthetic decision than a superstitious one. And something else I want to say is that when it comes to trim versus embroidery, embroidery is generally thought of as more valuable than trim, even if the trim is silk, because embroidery represents time. there's a lot of time and effort that goes into creating a design, repeating it reliably in whatever fiber you choose, and sitting there and doing that work when you could be doing a lot of other work with your time. Whereas it's pretty simple to just take some fabric and stitch it on. And so, again, silk trim is seen as counterintuitively less valuable than embroidered trim. And as for coats, coats were not split all the way to the hem of the garment. They were split oftentimes to the waist. Like this coat, which is a bar coat, and it has a standing collar. And you can see that these metal toggles are attached with finger loop braided loops rather than holes cut into the fabric. And you can also see that they have cuffs. Now, cuff decorations are, again, you see them a lot. A lot of times it's trim or embroidery, but they could be fancier. They could be bigger cuffs that are either sewn directly on or that are laced or buttoned onto over top of your clothing. And if they're buttoned over top and they're separate pieces, they're oftentimes, if you think about it, that's a very useful way of doing it, because you can wear your very fancy accessories with whatever clothing you want. You just unbutton it and you button it onto something else. With something like this is done on silk and then stitched separately to this coat. So theoretically, if the coat got damaged, or if I wanted this to be on another garment, I could cut it off without damaging the embroidery or the coat, and then I could sew it on somewhere else. So that's also very useful. A lot of embroidery is done on a separate ground and then added onto the fabric for that reason. You can pass it down through generations if it lasts that long, because even as the underlying garment wears away, the embroidery is still intact, and the ground it's sitting on can be removed and transferred. So you have cuff decorations, you have decorations on the body panel. This is made of wool. It's a heavier wool than what I'm wearing in my dress right now, because it's an overgarment. You have decorations on the hem. And if you, I'm going to cover noble garb later because it's more similar to itself than it is to either men's or women's garb that's more lower class. Hold on one second. Yes, so the question is, as for bars, would bars have been common on women's dresses? How far down would they extend? And were bars ever tablet woven? I don't think they were as common as on men's garments, but I believe that there are some examples of them. I treat them as sort of, kind of, probably period, and I wear them because I enjoy them a lot. As far as how far they would extend, I haven't really seen them past the chest area. My general rule of thumb is they extend as far as the keyhole goes on your neckline. So on a coat where it is split down to the waist, I would have it no lower than the chest area, but I would be willing to have it lower than that, lower than it is on my garment. But my garment, because it's not split so far, it's kind of just split here to this, about the sternum. Sorry. I don't want my bars to extend below the end of my keyhole. And I believe bars were tablet woven. I think I've seen some examples of that. Again, weaving isn't really my passion. I've done it, but I don't like it. So I kind of gloss over a lot of the woven details. But yes, I believe that there are woven bars. And I have seen that before. So I think it's time to move on to women's garb, unless there's any questions. As for something like shoes, oh, leg wraps. These things, they go by a lot of names. Leg wraps is descriptive, but they're also winigas or pooties, depending on which culture you're going with. And these were worn by men on their ankles up to their calves if they were not wearing higher boots. If their shoes were cut lower, then they wore ankle wraps. If their shoes were cut higher, then it was not really worth it. And these things are ubiquitous in areas where it is cold. The Russian army issues these to its soldiers to this day because they're really helpful at keeping the heat in. And they look really nice and they're very distinctive, but do be warned that they are warm. And they come with hooks on the end. This is wrapped with a hook on the inside, so I can't really show you, but these are woven, I believe, as separate pieces on a loom. So if you've ever looked at leg wraps at an event and thought, why are they so expensive? It's just a strip of fabric. Well, they're very long strips of fabric and you have to weave them individually. So if it's outside of your budget, horse leg wraps, I'm told, are very good, but they're also extremely long and very warm. So do be warned about that. You can also skip them, especially if it's hot out. But they're a pretty common part of the men's wardrobe. I believe women probably also wore them, but because it's under your dress, it's not really visible. So if I was in a situation where I was really cold, I would probably put them on, but it's not an aesthetic choice for me. So moving on to women's clothing. Again, you follow the pattern of undergarment, overgarments. And really this pattern is kind of 3 steps. You have the undergarment, the garment, and then the overgarment. Because I'm counting overgarment as like a coat or a cloak or something, which goes over top and keeps you warm. But if you go inside or if you go to a warm place, you're going to shed that garment and keep your primary garment on over top of your undergarment. So right now I'm wearing an undergarment. You can see through the keyhole, and I'm wearing a garment, but I'm not wearing an overgarment. These are very loose terms. So this is one of my underdresses. This one has a keyhole with no toggle at the top. So when I wear this, I will either leave it open, or if it's exposed, I might use this or a similar brooch to close it. And it is long. I prefer my undergarments when they're visible, to be visible at the lower hems, maybe at the sleeves, and at the neckline if my garments are lower cut or are cut to expose them, which is a decision I make sometimes. And if my garments are not made to expose them, then I take some liberties. In the summer, if it's really hot out and I don't want to wear something that covers my entire arm and goes all the way down to the floor, then I might pick a dress that is maybe a little higher neck than you would think for a summer garment, maybe a little longer than you would expect. But underneath, I wear something more similar to a Western European kameez or something that's designed to go under, say, a codardi, where the overgarment is like this, so the undergarment is like this. So it's got a lower neckline, Sometimes some of my kameezes I've actually cut the sleeves off at like the elbow, so I don't have as much sleeve there. Maybe it's even shorter, so I have a lot more ventilation going through. And I also have I have other tricks for dealing with the heat, which I'll get to later. But there's a lot of little cheats that you can put in that make wearing Rus Garb viable and feasible, even when it's hot out and you don't live in Russia. So that is my undergarment. And this is kind of a mix between an undergarment and a garment. I haven't had the chance to wear this yet, but this is my interpretation of a more rural dress for the summer. It's a coarser linen. It does, in fact, have embroidery at the neckline and at the sleeves. And at the hem, it ends in a different linen. So this is a very natural colored linen. It's not bleached at all. It has a keyhole neckline cut at the left of my neck with a toggle made of fabric. And this is something that can be worn on its own. You don't have to wear multiple layers. This is probably something that a peasant woman or a rural woman would wear out in the field, would wear working, tending animals, tending children, especially in the warmer months when there isn't as much snow and ice and it's not super cold. So all you really care about is that you are covered, and then you're able to do whatever you need to do that day. And I'll get back to this dress a little later because there are other forms of overgarments than just cloaks and coats, especially when you get out into the rural areas. But as for garments, I've got a couple of examples. Again, this I would consider to be a garment. This actually has, in addition to bars, it has a collar, which is standing, and it has not only silk but some goldwork embroidery. There are a lot of examples of goldwork embroidery, which are covered a lot in some of the articles translated by Ivan Ryzansky. So the links in my PowerPoint will get you there. And if goldwork embroidery is something that interests you, I encourage you to talk to me because I have a lot of thoughts on it and I do a lot of it. And I will absolutely talk to you about it and answer any questions that you have about period goldwork and how you can use it. But you see it a lot, primarily in standing collars and accessories. So this is another garment. You can see it's got a keyhole neckline similar to this, but this one has toggles, which are made of glass. So these are just glass beads. And on the inside here, what I've done is I have a long finger loop braided cord, which I have looped, if it would focus. I've looped out and into the fabric to form loops for my beads. And there are a lot of people who do it like this. I think this is the more period way to do it. Most of my toggles are not done like this. Most of my toggles, I sew an individual loop and then I cut it off and I sew it on. I find it to be so much easier. But this is the more period way of doing it. And then it's got a standing collar and it has embroidery at the neckline, and at the sleeves, and at the hem. And it's a very simple stitch, but I don't believe this one is period. I just kind of made it up. And this is a long garment with a high neck. So again, I will wear this in the summer. It's made out of linen, but underneath it, I will wear a very improper undergarment because no one's going to see the undergarment, but it's going to make a big difference in how I feel. So that is one way that I cheat. this garment is actually also made out of linen, but it is a recreation of a garment on the cover of the book that I mentioned earlier by Yulia Stepanova about the burial dress of the Rus in the upper Volga region. And what you'll actually see is that in addition to embroidery, this neckline has cowrie shells and bells. There are a lot of bells in the archaeological record. There are bells on hats, there are bells on temple rings, there are bells braided into women's hair. And so I really wanted to capture that, and I want to do more bells in the future. And then the hem has another period embroidery design from Finds, which was not necessarily on this dress, but I liked it. I wanted to throw it in there. And another thing you'll notice is that this has a pretty low neckline and no sleeves. This was probably a young woman's garment. Probably would not have been worn by a married woman. And I'll discuss the differences later when we get to headgear, because that's really where you see it. But this is another one I like to wear when it's hot out, because it's sleeveless. And so all I have on my arms is just a thin layer of the lightweight linen that I use for my undergarments. So that's very nice. But I do have to wear a period undergarment with this one. Leave that for later. So now I think it's time to get to the overgarments, which are coats. And coats for women are very similar to like garment dresses for women, in that, again, a coat is cut to the waist. It's not cut all the way to the hem. And it is embellished in similar ways to men's coats. So really, if I was wearing another dress underneath this one, and this was maybe a bit thicker of a wool, I would say this is a coat. There are also cloaks, which are often pinned. I think this is a work in progress because I'm braiding the fringe on one side and I don't have fringe on the other yet, I think. But this is eventually going to be a cloak. And really, there's nothing super complicated about this. You wear it over your shoulders, you pin it, you can wrap it in interesting ways, I think, but I have no real opinions on how to wrap cloaks. Most of the illustrations I've seen are of upper class women. So the cloak is actually pinned underneath a mantle, which I will again discuss in a little bit. But you have a garment over top, which covers your shoulders and a bit of your chest. And underneath that, you have a cloak, which is very simply pinned in the front and then open in the front. And it's just a simple cape, essentially, that extends as far as you want it to extend. And another overgarment I want to talk about is another, working class is not the word, but another peasant article of clothing. This is, which is in kind of an apron, or I believe it's called a panova. There are Russian words for all of these things that I'm saying, but I don't remember them, so I don't want to mislead you by misremembering them or pronouncing them incorrectly. So I simply use English words. And I encourage you to look at Sophia Larousse, where there's a whole dictionary of these words. So this is how that was worn. It's tied around the waist, and you have 2 apron panels, or maybe you have a third one. There were either 2 or 3 panels. And so these are excellent if you are working, you know, it's an apron. It protects your clothes, and it is something to wipe your hands on if you need it. And so this is something that I would wear again with this undergarment, because this is a working garment. if I was, say, at Penzik, if I was cooking for people, this is what I would choose to wear, and this is what I would wear over top of it. It doesn't really add much heat. It's just a few panels around your waist. And it adds a lot of utility. So this, well, this is probably more of a young woman's garment, either unmarried or newly married, and was probably actually a wedding garment because it was, again, found in a young woman's grave. This setup is more of an older woman's garment. The sort of person who has children, who has responsibilities, who is married and has a household, and is doing stuff throughout the day that requires getting a little dirty. And again, if you want to see examples of shoes, shoes are oftentimes leather, but they can also be birch bark. I would like to talk a little bit about birch bark because it is almost ubiquitous. You see birch bark used in any manner of things. I have a box here from Feed the Ravens, which is made out of birch bark. Birch bark was used to make hats. It was used in knife sheaths. It was used in shoes. It was used to write messages and letters on. It was used in other ways that are slipping my mind, but if you can imagine it, it was used in that way. Birch bark is one of the rare materials that is harder to source for us than it was for them. I can buy like gold material online and have it shipped to me in a matter of days. It took me months to get birch bark from Russia, and it cost a lot. And I couldn't get a lot of it, or in the sizes I needed. You can find some on Etsy, but it's, again, going to take you a long time to get. So birch bark is ubiquitous. I don't use a ton of it. I don't use nearly as much as I would if I was actually a woman living in medieval Russia. So that's, again, another concession that we have to make. So now I'm going to talk about accessories and transition into headgear, which is my favorite topic. I love headgear. I'm a veil apologist. I know a lot of people find veils frustrating and irritating. I love them. My hair has never been a period style since I've been in the SCA. I'm getting it there, primarily because I want to try out some period styles for a couple of years, and then just go right back to cutting it all off again. But I have had everything from, my hair right now is the longest it's been, and you'll see it when I show you ways of wrapping veils, but it's about shoulder length. I've been everywhere from here to like shaved. So I can give you pointers if you don't have all that much hair for how to wrap your veil. I can't really give you pointers for if you've got too much of it to easily wrap a veil. I mean, I don't want to pass judgment on how much hair you have. So there are a variety of things that you can do with headwear. And this is primarily a women's thing, but it's also a men's thing. Men wore hats as well. If you were not noble, if you were not a prince or a boyar, you probably wore either a simple birch bark hat, like this one. This is actually made out of birch bark. It's a pretty thick birch bark, and it was a little tough to use. And the hat, it's basically like a pillbox hat. It's got some embellishment on the outside, but not all that much. And it's got a bit of a silk top, and I lined it in wool for comfort. And if I take off my temple rings, this is a women's hat or a men's hat. And it looks like this. And there are a variety of different styles that you could do. Most of them are kind of variations on a pillbox. They weren't only made out of birch bark, they were also made out of leather. I recommend leather if you're not trying to be super accurate, and like if you don't really care about working with birch bark, I would recommend leather. It's a lot easier. This fur hat, again, or similar fur hats, is a unisex style. And you can wear it over a veil if you are a married woman, or you can wear it without one if you are a man or an unmarried woman. Veils are worn by women after they marry. Before they marry, they probably wear their hair in braids or loose. And then there is something called temple rings, which are worn over top of it, which, don't eat that, which is probably the most distinctive aspect of Rus Garb. If I am around and I see someone wearing something like this, I know that they're Rus. If I see someone wearing like something like this, they could be Byzantine. If I see them in this, they could be Byzantine. There's a lot of garments that I showed you that could be Scandinavian, could be Celtic, could be even certain Baltic tribes, which were in the surrounding area. A lot of the lower class garb is not distinctly Rus either, until you add the temple rings. Temple rings are regionally specific. These ones with the little hammered blades on them indicate Novgorod. There are others. And I've got links. I've got a link on the PowerPoint to an excellent website that goes through temple rings. I'm sorry about the cat. She's worse if I lock her out. So hold on, I had a pile. Here it is. One of my biggest challenges when I was starting in Rus Garb was figuring out what to do for a veil. I have all of my veils from Dharma Trading Company. That's DHARMA. And they sell pre-hemmed scarves that are made out of silk. And you can buy a variety of different options of silk from them. And so I want to go through basically the options that I've tried and what I think about them, so that you can make an informed decision, because I certainly couldn't at the beginning of all this. So this is Habitai, and when I asked about veils, this was what I was immediately recommended, because a lot of people who wear Western European veils, especially if they're wearing like wimples and stuff like that, prefer Habitai. It's kind of hard to see over the camera, but it is kind of translucent, and it's very flowy, and it's very slippery. And that's all right if you are pinning your veils into place. I don't pin my veils. All my veils are wrapped, and they're tied into position. So I don't find this to be helpful. I actually find it to be very frustrating and poofy where I don't want it to be. So I would not recommend Habitai for a Rus veil. What I use most often is called Crepe de Chine. CREPE space DE space Chine, CHINE. And so it's not visually all that impressive. It's not super shiny or sleek. But what it is it holds very well to its shape once you put it on, and it does wrinkle pretty badly. This was a smooth veil, and then I wore it, and then I took it off, and this is what it looks like. So be aware of that. But I find it to be the most helpful. And then the other veils I have are wool silk blends. This is from Feed the Raven. Feed the Ravens again. I like wool silk blends, but they tend to be warm. And Dharma Trading Company does have a wool silk blend, which I really like. The last time I checked, they did not have a size that was big enough to wear for most of the veil styles I prefer. So I did buy it anyway, and I enjoy it, and I wear it sometimes. But it's not going to be useful for me for most things. So if you look on the PowerPoint, you'll see a few different ways that I like to wear veils. And I'll walk you through it kind of in level of complexity. But first off, I want to say, if you have hair that you can tie back, even if it makes a really tiny and like strange looking ponytail, you should do it. And prioritize getting the little wispy hairs at the base of your neck. You want a low ponytail because those hairs are going to be a lot harder to tuck in than hair toward the front of your head that's more substantial. As for size that I get for my veils, I don't remember specifically the dimensions of these, but that depends on the style that you're using a little bit. This one, you can't see, but it's my wingspan basically. It's basically my wingspan. And I don't know, maybe 1.5 feet. I'm bad with dimensions. But if you get back to me after the fact, I can go through my purchase history and I can tell you for sure. And underneath the veil, you want to protect the veil and you want to protect your hair. So there are caps. And Sophia LaRousse has an excellent pattern for caps. I'm actually going to switch caps because this fits a bit better. So after I've tied my hair back, I put the cap on and I center it and I tuck as much hair in as possible. And you can put the cap as low or high on your forehead as you desire. Whether it peeks out from under the veil is an aesthetic choice on your end. Most caps did not cover the ears. Many veils didn't cover the ears. I don't have pierced ears, but a lot of Russian women did. And there are a lot of earrings in the historical record. And there are some accounts of people traveling to Russia and remarking on how the women of Russia wore their earrings very prominently. So veil styles are often going to display the lower ear. So for this first style, which is what I was wearing, I'm going to center the veil on my head. It has equal parts on each side. And I'm going to grab the veil in my fists after I bring it to the back of my shoulders and kind of make it into 2 parts. And then I'm going to tie a really quick knot in it. Sorry, I mostly do this in front of a mirror. I need to watch myself while I do it. I don't know why. Okay. So you tie a knot. And you can leave it like this. Well, not really. You can leave it like this-ish. You can leave it with just a couple of strands. This is fine. But if you want to do something more with it, what I like to do is I take 1 strand at a time and I wrap it around. And if you've got hair in the back there, if you've got kind of a bulge in the way that your cap lies, you grab that with the veil and you wrap it around. and then you take the other end and you follow it. And you're making kind of a bun shape. And it looks really nice at the end, but it's actually super easy. It's a little uneven, but if I was doing it in front of a mirror, it would be much better. So, over top of this, I might put temple rings. This is another style of temple rings I have, and you can tie it. You can take a length of woven trim, and you can secure the knot to the rest of your head. You can like bring it in the back and wrap it around your head a few times. If you want to aesthetically, or if you're a little worried that it will come undone. Sometimes that happens. You can't really get a good purchase. Generally, I'll just use this for temple rings. You can wear hats with this, but it can get a little weird with the way the knot is if it's too high on your head. But this is a good style for the summer, minus the fur hat, because it keeps the veil off of your neck, and all it covers is your head, which is actually nice sometimes in the summer if the top of your head is prone to getting hot in the sun. So that's the first style. And for the second style, I'm going to start in the same way, but I'm going to adjust this on my head. This is the fancy style I wear, and I wear it with hats, especially super fancy hats. If I'm portraying a noblewoman, I'll probably be using this style. It'll be a little hard to show you because it's the dress that I chose for this. But you center it in your head, and you tie a knot in the back. And then you bring it to the front. And this takes a little bit of practice to avoid choking yourself, or to get the silhouette you want. But you want to identify the top edge of each individual bit, and you're going to pick one and wrap it fully around your neck. And then you pick the other and you wrap it back around your neck. And then you tie that in the back. And you can tuck any end that still is there into your veil or into the back of your dress if you would like. If I didn't have a collar on my dress, this would be a lot tighter to my neck. So ideally, the silhouette for this is that you've got your face, and then it kind of looks like your neck is just a veil. And I wear this with fancy hats often because I like the effect. I'll cover this in a bit. I'm going to do accessories and noble stuff at the same time, I think. Because a lot of the fanciest accessories are, of course, what nobility wear. And then I'll touch on stuff like jewelry. But there's a lot of jewelry that I included in the PowerPoint, so I'm kind of saving that for last. And then finally, the final style. This requires the biggest veil, but this is kind of a catch-all size. And I haven't been wearing this as often lately because, well, first off, there's been no events, but second off, it's not great for wearing a mask with, so you'll see. But you want to divide it into thirds. So I am putting it on top of my head, but one side is about this long, and the other side is about this long. And I'm going to take the longer side. I'm going to make sure it's all in front. And I'm going to take the leading edge, again, keep note of that leading edge, and wrap it around my head, like this. And then I'm going to take the end, and I'm going to tuck it in at the neck. And this is the warmest style of veil that I do, because again, it covers the whole head. I do like it. think it looks very distinctive. And it usually will look a little bunched up and weird until you put temple rings or a hat on. You can wear this with a hat. I prefer temple rings. Yeah, it's very warm. It's a little less warm if you're using a thin silk like I am. I have worn this in warmer months. And with this end, you know, you can tuck it in as well if you want. You can throw it over your shoulder if it's long enough. And you can tug and pull to get it how you want it. But once the temple rings are on, this is staying in place. And it took me a bit of practice to get these veil styles down and to really recognize that I didn't need pins. I used a lot of pins the first couple events I went to because I was so scared that it would come undone. But it's really easy once you get it down to just keep it there. I think the only problems that I've really had with my veils are if I wrap it into kind of a bun, sometimes that comes undone. And again, you can prevent that with trim. Or you can just leave it be if it comes undone and you're tired of fussing with it. Now, I've got about half an hour left. So I'm going to move on to nobility and accessories. Nobility, as I mentioned, dressed like Byzantine royalty much of the time during this period. And men's and women's garb was very much the same for this. Princely garb often went very low, sometimes to the floor, where most tunics go about, thigh or knee length. Men's garb could, if you were a boyar, could go all the way to the floor. And you see this style of decoration with a big strip down the front. It's more common in upper class styles because it's a very Byzantine style of decoration. And sometimes it's on the back as well. This one's only on the front. This at the waist is actually an SCA thing. It's not necessarily a period form of decoration, but this is not a garment that I would wear a belt with. You don't wear belts over top of a garment like this. Not only because it's not the style that you would wear, but because this is gold work in the front, and I don't want to chafe the gold work and make it wear out sooner than it should. So, because I'm a squire, I put a fabric belt on so that this displays that I am a squire, even though I'm not wearing my red belt. And I think that's a good way of doing it. So something that I like to do is considering SCA repurposing of, period techniques. This hem is silk. It's also a little bit more fancy. It's double layered. And this is a very nice wool. I could hypothetically have made this whole thing out of silk, but I didn't want to. This goldwork embroidery is also a period design. Again, you can find a lot of those at the sites I've linked to Ivan Ryzansky's blog, where he's translated articles. It's very difficult to find scholarship that is accessible to English speakers from Russia because, there's a lot of history there that means that there isn't a lot of stuff that's translated, and most of the history books you find written in English about Russia are not about medieval Russia. You get Tsaristan later and only Tsaristan later. So it's kind of hard. Accessories worn by nobility come in a few forms. And again, this stuff is unisex for the most part. This is a mantle. Mantles were worn around the shoulders and covering part of the chest and back. So this is not the veil I would wear with a mantle, but this is roughly what it looks like. And again, if I were to wear a cloak under this, it would be pinned below the mantle and it would extend out beneath it. And this is more goldwork embroidery in period designs. And you can see that I've used pearls as well as gold glass beads. Gold glass beads are glass beads that are made with bits of gold leaf in them. And they're actually very period. You see, I think in the first couple of slides that I shared, you see gold glass beads. They are everywhere. These are some of the cuffs that I mentioned earlier, where you can have something that has toggles that you can transfer from garment to garment and button on over top of whatever you're wearing. And then finally, hats. So these look kind of similar to the temple rings that I showed you earlier. They're kind of temple rings in the sense that they're rings worn at the temples, but they have their own name, which is kolty. K-O-L-T-Y, kolty. And these are often hollow. I've seen it, I think people believe that they were filled with perfumed cloth or with solid perfume. And this is not the right veil for this, but you can have beads on the edge of this. You can also put beads on the edges of your veils. And in addition to gold work, there are little sequins. They're not quite sequins as we think of them. So if you search sequins, you won't find what you want. But little chips of metal that are cut into shapes and have holes in them that you can sew onto things. These were used in various shapes. You see them round, you see them teardrops. And I have another example of a hat here, which is less period of a design. This is another SCA thing, where I've taken heraldry, and the strands of pearls are a period thing. These embellishments are reasonably period, where I've got a glass bead and some pearls. But this central piece is entirely me going ham and getting creative. So I definitely want to say, if there's something you take away from this, it's not that you necessarily need to be very period all of the time. You can choose when to be period, you can choose how period to be. And in the SCA, there's no one who can really tell you that's too period or that's not period enough. Well, within reason, as long as you meet the 10 feet rule. And you can make different determinations for different events, for how you feel, and you can really get creative. You can put the C in SCA, and you can modify things for your own heraldry, for your own titles, for whatever you want to put in there. I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think you could do a lot of things with a birch bark or leather hat made into the style of like a coronet, or say a mantle with a chain design around the hem of it. If you didn't want to wear something like this, which sometimes I don't. Sometimes if I'm wearing a mantle, it's hard to see the chain. So I kind of think, okay, well, I'm wearing this, but it's almost superfluous, except for the meaning that it holds. So if the meaning that it holds can be put onto the mantle, well, then why not do that? So that's another thought that I've had. Again, you can put belts onto your garments. And let me see if there's anything I've forgotten, but I definitely want to call for, other accessories. Glass beads. Oh my God. Beaded necklaces with glass or precious stones, or pearls. There's lots of pearls. This is what's called a lunala pendant. You see them a lot. There are a lot of ideas about lunala pendants. I haven't seen anything I would consider to be definitive. I've got a bit of time to be on a soapbox, I think. If you've been in and around certain like Slavic style historical interest groups, you've probably seen a lot of like infographics and informative things about, well, this is what embroidery means, and this is what these colors mean, and these are interpretations of this is how the pagans did it before they were Christianized by Vladimir in the 10th century, calling back to the very beginning of this class. And what I want to tell you is that we know extremely little about pre-Christian Slavic faith. What we know is largely distilled down to linguistic analysis. We have the names of a few gods that were worshipped, whose idols were cast into the river by Vladimir after his baptism and before the baptism of the entire city of Kiev. He threw them down, he smashed them up, he tossed them into the river, and they are named. And that's really what we've got. We've got that, and we've got some little carvings that could have been, house spirits, could have been deities, could have been little figures that people made and set on the mantle because they liked them, because people do that. So, there are a lot of people out there who, for whatever reason, deeply crave knowledge of pagan Russia, pagan Slavic faith. And that is a valid desire, but we simply don't have that. So while I would say that there's nothing wrong with looking back through, history and saying, well, I would like to build my own personal faith that I think is, useful and meaningful and speaks to me, but I'm not going to claim it as something historical. If you see something that claims to be historical knowledge, and it's talking about paganism, it's talking about how things were done, what symbols mean, really take that with a grain of salt, because it's probably lying to you. It may not intend to be lying to you, or it may intend to be lying to you for some purpose or another. But that's my soapbox. I did forget another thing, which is that I made a flower crown. This is another cheat that I did for Penzik. I'm sorry this is so unstructured. I originally taught this in person. This is the second time I've taught this. So I'm a little kind of lost as to kind of the structure. But I feel like I've covered everything I wanted to cover. So if you don't want to wear a veil, but you do want something over your head, if, for example, it's Penzik and it's really hot out and it's really sunny out and you want something to shade your face and you really don't want there to be fabric on your head, this is made out of entirely non-period materials and methods. But there are a lot of Slavic traditions centered around flower crowns, and there's some scholarship to suggest that these traditions originated long ago. There are burials with head decorations in the shape and form of ceramic or metal flowers, perhaps indicating, or calling back to a common festival or to the status of the person, probably, an unmarried but marriageable woman. So the idea is that these flower crowns were worn. Not these ones. This is a little big. But the idea is that flower crowns were probably worn by women who were of marrying age but not yet married. And so I made one, and it's big because it's kind of like a big brimmed hat. So that's another thing I want to emphasize, is have fun with things. If it brings you joy, and you're not being super serious, but you're being reasonably, you know, do what you want. I'm not here to give you rules or guidelines. I'm here to give you suggestions and reasons for those suggestions. And I hope that you can take those and do your own scholarship, maybe do your own experimenting, and come up with your own guidelines and rules, and come up with your own things that satisfy you and make you passionate in your own journey in the SCA. So does anyone else have any questions? We're a little ahead of time, which I didn't expect. I think I rushed a little bit. But I would be happy to go back and cover anything that people feel I kind of glossed over a little. Yes, fur. So Russia was actually, fur was massive in Russia's economy. The word for 40 in Russian is 40, which is very different from the words for other numbers like 30 or 4, for example. 40 comes out of left field, and that's because that's how many furs were sold in a. That's because 40 relates to fur, and you could sell a bundle of furs for 40 silver, I believe, 40 grivna. I don't remember the story exactly. Take that with a grain of salt. Do your own research on that one if you want to repeat it. But 40 and fur and money are linked because fur was a massive resource. So fur, you know, I don't use it a lot. There's fur lining on overgarments. Fur hats, obviously. This is a lightweight hat. This is coarse linen with a fur trim, but ideally the entire inside of the hat would be fur and the trim would be bigger. This is the only fur garment I own. I've got a lot of rabbit fur. I have yet to do much more with it than this. But yeah, fur is warm. Warmth is good. Fur on overgarments, fur on hats. Fur is very economically significant. The fur trade is massive in medieval Russia. It is known what kinds of fur were used, but not to me right now. I've definitely read it. I don't want to say words that are not accurate in search of an answer for you, because that's something I would feel very bad about, and it would not be good practice. I know that I've read what furs were used. If anyone wants to chime in because they know, that would be great. I'm not remembering. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Again, I've got my blind spots. Weaving is a blind spot. Fur is another blind spot.
I actually had a question. Did you go over princely garb and I just missed it because I know that you were doing headwear?
So, so princely garb is very Byzantine in aesthetic appearance. So, princely garb and Byzantine garb look very similar. This is the only real example of princely garb I've got right now. This is a garment. It's got kind of a lower neck so that it can expose any garments underneath. It is wool, but it's got a lot of silk on it. It has gold work down the front. And with this, you would wear such accessories as a mantle, which is again a very period Byzantine sort of a aesthetic choice, which sits on the shoulders. You would probably wear removable cuffs, and you would probably wear a fancy hat with things at the temples dangling down, oftentimes pearls, oftentimes ending in kolti, which are these. You wouldn't actually really probably be wearing temple rings. Those are more regional signifiers if you are like not princely. And this is not how this hat would normally sit. I just also have temple rings on, so I don't want to smush them. But this is like the profile. And you'll see, if you look at the famous mosaics of Justinian and Theodora in Constantinople, this is very similar to what they're wearing. And this is kind of a unisex style. If you look at the PowerPoint presentation, the interpretations of princely garb look very similar regardless of gender, with some exceptions. And you're probably wearing some very elaborate detail work. There are hats with like plaques on them with images of saints. There is a lot of gold work embroidery. There's a lot of precious jewels. And there's a lot of like printed and woven designs in the fabric. I don't have any examples of that, but you've probably seen it. Fabric that has block printing on it in certain designs, or fabric that has woven designs that look distinct and visually striking. And you see this on the images I've provided. As for earrings and bracelets, that's another question that I received. Again, if you look at the presentation, there are bracelets made out of glass beads, and there are bracelets made out of metal. This is actually a period reproduction that my knight had made for his vigil ceremony. So it's not really showing up, but there are certain stamped designs that are very common. There we go. And that is a common stamped design. And this is just a cuff bracelet. So I've got pictures of metal bracelets and pictures of glass bracelets in the presentation. As for earrings, I have more pictures of those as well. They often had beads on them, and they could be either very simple or very complex. Temple rings could be worn as earrings. They could be worn woven into the hair if you were unmarried. They could be worn in a band about the head, like I'm wearing them. And you can wear multiple. The site that I gave that links to the temple ring thing, it's a whole study, if I recall correctly, on temple rings in various locations at various time periods. And so you see a lot of, grave sites where it's like this many rings on this side of the temple, this many on that side. This is the styles that they're in. It's a very cool thing to comb through. We do have an answer to the fur from Oswin, which hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. A project that I was part of started Russian but ended up Polish, but I do remember that squirrel was popular, and a huge part of the Novgorod economy, and beaver was popular up through the 14th century. That does sound familiar. Squirrel and beaver. So that is not coming from me, but I will say that out loud and say there is an answer for fur. I don't know if it's the answer, but it's an answer. Let's see. Byzantine styles of earrings, I would say are probably suitable for nobility, but otherwise there are some very interesting metal earrings that you can see in the PowerPoint. And there are plenty more if you go to the actual Novgorod Museum archive. If you translate the word earring and you put it into the search bar, you will find so many. One thing I will say about the museum archive is that a lot of their beads are listed as separate items, which can be a lot because there are a ton of beads. So I've gone through pages and pages and pages that are mostly beads and all look extremely similar. So that's the only real drawback of the museum archive. It's got a ton of stuff. The great thing about Novgorod is that its soil preserves a lot, and it's very easy to date objects because twice a year in Russia, when the seasons change, the roads became impassable, and this features heavily in World War II, so you may be familiar with it, but the mud becomes impassable. It becomes extremely extensive, which is a part of why river travel and trade was so important. But every few years, the wooden streets in Novgorod had to be replaced because the previous level would just sink progressively into the mud. And so they replaced it every certain number of years. And so you can go back and you can say, this is when this layer is. And anything that's found in this layer is probably from about this time period, which is very cool. And there's a lot of stuff that gets caught up in the slats of that road, like birch bark letters. Little pieces of jewelry, little things that people lose, little bits of trash. They get caught up in the gaps and kind of trapped there and preserved. So it's an extremely great resource. So we're just about out of time. Thank you so much for coming, for sticking with me through a 2-hour class. I know it's a little bit daunting.